In this video, we're going to look at what input and output is, the different types of input and output, and how input and output can be used with a Raspberry Pi. Input is data that goes into a system. An example of input would be pressing a button, as that inputs a signal into the system. Output is data that comes out of a system. For example, this could be the turning on of an LED. Using inputs and outputs with a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi has something called GPIO pins, as you can see marked in red. These stand for General Purpose Input and Output. This acts as an interface, allowing the Raspberry Pi to interact with the physical world. Here is a simple diagram of these GPIO pins. Each pin can have a state of either high or low, which is digital, so it's 0 or 1. Think of this like a button, so 0 is off and 1 is on. We will now look at what analog data is. Here is a representation of analog data. Analog data is unlike digital data as it is not restricted to a high and low value. Its value can vary throughout a spectrum. We'll have a look at some examples of analog input and output later. We will now look at the Grove PI device for the Raspberry Pi. Using the GPIO pins can be quite time consuming and complicated, so instead we connect to something called the Grove PI device, which can connect to both analog and digital data sources. Here you can see some of the components that can be used with the Grove PI for inputting and outputting data. To connect the Grove PI device, simply connect it to the GPIO pins on the back of the Pi, like so. We'll now look at an example of digital input and output. This is my code for the digital input and output, so you can see I set the button sensor and the LED to digital pins 3 and 4. So here's an example of digital input and output, so you can see on the screen there that the current state is 0 as nothing is happening. If I press the button, the state turns to 1 and the light comes on, and then release and back to 0. We will now look at an example of analog input and output. So this is the code I'll be using for the analog input and output. Here I set the code for the output, which will be digital pin 3, and here I set the analog reading to the input. So here's an example of analog input and output. So I have an angle sensor here, so you can see on the screen the state is currently 0. If I turn that, it gradually increases, and make note of the LED there, so when I decrease, the LED slowly goes off, and when I increase, the LED slowly comes on. So that's an example of analog input and output. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for watching.